This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is ghosts. I'll be speaking with two experts about the matter, and the conversation will begin when we return. The subject is ghosts, the afterlife. What is a ghost? Are there ghosts? Is there any scientific possibility there can be ghosts? And I'm speaking with two experts about it. In the left corner is Toke Thompson. I like to give my guests a few minutes to give a little bit of background about themselves and their interests. So let me start with you, Toke, who you are, what you've written about it, and how you got interested in the subject matter.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, my name is Toke Thompson. I'm a professor of anthropology and communications at the University of Southern California. And I've been teaching a course on ghost stories for about 15 years now at USC. And I'm a folklorist by nature. So for me, ghosts are a great genre of folklore. It's a great sort of introductory topic to let students know a little bit about the discipline of folklore, how it works and why and whatnot. So again, ghosts are a folk belief. It's not an institutional or scientific belief, but it's a pretty strong belief for a lot of people. And so that just in and of itself interests me right there.
On the bottom of the screen is my second guest, Benjamin Radford. He is, I believe you bill yourself as one of the few supernatural investigators that uses science. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's one way to phrase it. I wear a lot of hats.
So a little bit of background about yourself and any opening volleys from you.
Sure. I'm an author of 12 going on 13 books, including a book titled Investigating Ghosts, The Scientific Search for Spirits. I'm also a member of the American Folklore Society and the Society for Contemporary Legend Research, institutions Toke knows well. And I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in education. I'm currently finishing a second master's degree as well. And my interest is actually very similar to Toke's in that I've always been fascinated by ghosts, and particularly the sort of liminal subjects that there's dispute over whether they even exist. I just find that idea fascinating, that there can be things that people discuss in the world, whether it's psychic powers or aliens or ghosts or Bigfoot or what have you, that there is still some legitimate debate about. I find just that premise fascinating. So that's how I come to it. And a little bit, so I bring in folklore, I bring in journalism, and I also bring in investigations. So this is one of the things that sort of sets me apart from many other sort of ghost hunters, if you will, is that not only do I have the academic background, but I've done investigations into these things. I've been on ghost hunts. I've done TV shows, things like that. So I sort of try to bring in not just the sort of the scholarly academic perspective and the folklore perspective, but also the on the ground field work, boots on the ground, what the hell's going on here.
So one of the films that I wanted to just use as an example of what a ghost is versus what it might not be is because we often tangle up the idea of a ghost with a soul. The beginning of the film, It's a Wonderful Life, you see up in heaven the stars, and they're talking as if there's disembodied spirits about the character that's going to come down and be the main character played in the film, as if there is a pre-existing soul. So when we talk about ghosts, are we talking about physical remnants? Are we talking generally about the belief in a soul? Because that brings up all kinds of things like ensoulment, abortion, things like that. So when we talk about ghosts like Casper the Friendly Ghost, are we specifically talking about dead people and spirits after life, and any spirits before life are not considered ghosts? Either one of you.
Great question. I think, one of the things you have to be concerned with in doing these investigations is, what do we mean by what we say? And that's going to be different in different languages and in different cultures. So, for my class, we basically work on a basic framework that, ghosts are the spirits of dead people that are experienced by the living. And, that negates some things from being considered ghosts. They're a little bit different than zombies or vampires or something. But it also is not the same everywhere. Some ghosts are corporal, where you can, in Japan, ghosts tend to be corporal. You can shake their hand, you can pat them on the back. You can have sex with ghosts and ghost babies, which brings it to a whole new level of, I think, spookiness. So there's a lot of variation, but ghosts are some form of what we say a ghost are very, very widespread belief throughout the world, but not universal. So you want to include both those things. There are societies that do not have something like ghosts, but something like we think of ghosts are pretty common in many, many societies.
Ben?
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, he's exactly right. In addition, keep in mind that the boundaries here are porous, right? And so it's not always crystal clear whether something is a ghost, a poltergeist, a fairy. I mean, you get into these entities that are invisible and yet are manifesting themselves in various ways around us. And who's to say, right? I mean, I've had discussions with people. They say, I'm sure there's a ghost in my house, and I ask them why they think that. And I say, well, how is that different than a little miniature dragon or whatever else? And so one of the things I talk about in one of my books is how oftentimes the word ghost is used as a label for an experience. It's not because there's no universal agreement on what a ghost is. So there are people that believe that ghosts are the most common one that Talk just mentioned was the idea that they're disembodied spirits of those who have passed. Other ghost hunters and ghost believers will say that's totally wrong. That's completely wrong. No, in fact, they are projections from the mind out into the world. Other people who subscribe to this thing called stone tape theory say that's wrong as well. In fact, what it is it's these vibrations of anger and fear and loathing and murder and things like that are absorbed into the environment and then released in the form of vibrations, whatever else that are experienced as ghosts. So this is why, for example, at Gettysburg, people talk about these recurring ghosts and this notion that the ghosts are these energies that are manifested from the soldiers that were killed there in the battlefields and the trees that come out of there. So this is one of the contradictions: is that there's no you can talk to half dozen ghost experts and you'll get a half dozen mutually exclusive definitions.
Yeah, it's like
because it's not a scientific thing, right? And so
Right.
there is no official definition of a ghost because ghosts are not an official thing. So because it's a part of folklore, then folks have their different own definition. But there's clearly an overlap, a lot of overlaps with ideas like souls, with in different genres, like in go to Ireland, the fairy folk, the banshee. There's overlaps with the idea of the ghost. Various spirits, or angels, ghosts, right? Some people think that the angels are ghosts. Other people are like, no, they're a different sort of spirit. So again, the concept overlaps in interesting ways with all sorts of number of categories, ranging from the mundane to the very, very religious.
Yeah, when you're speaking about having sex with ghosts, well, I would think of the hags and the incubi and the succubi and also little gray aliens, or there's some alien abduction stories of fiery red aliens having sex with farmers down in South America or whatnot. But generally, it is maybe 75–80% of what the world thinks of as ghosts would be the dead. The remnants of the dead, what we would call the spirit, the soul, the 21 grams that became famous from that movie.
Yeah, it's people who, like Benjamin was saying, it's an experience. So people experience seeing someone who's supposed to be dead, right? And that's usually the main way that people describe ghosts. But of course, like you said, people might have different rationales as to why they experience it. Is it a part of their memory, like the phantom limb? Or is it someone's spirit that is coming back from the dead? That's very common, but it's not, it's not everywhere. So there's different ways that people explain these phenomena.
And I would just add to that not only are there different ways of explaining it, there's a huge variation in things that are ascribed to ghosts, right? Because again, we don't know for sure what ghosts are. I mean, we can bounce around different ideas and different theories. But if you talk to real, everyday, ordinary people, average people, as Token and I have, and you have as well, you get this impossibly diverse set of experiences that they're sort of lumping together as they're sort of, again, putting the ghost label on it. So, for example, oftentimes when you talk to people about the experiential ghost, there'll be something like, well, I'll talk to somebody and say, well, I saw a ghost. They'll say, okay, well, I'm not being facetious. I don't know what that means. What do you think it means, right? What is your understanding of what a ghost is and how does it fit with that? And oftentimes, there'll be something like missing keys. Yeah. It'll be a smell. It'll be a feeling of being watched or being warm or or just ordinary everyday things. It'll be something like, even winning $50 on a lottery ticket. Is their spirit is looking over them. And the reason this is important, the reason I point this out, is that the number of things that can be attributed to ghosts is just super broad. I mean, a smell, a sight, a sound, anything weird under these circumstances. And the key here is that these things typically are mundane, ordinary things that outside the context of ghost belief are dismissed. Right? We all lose our keys now and then. We all smell something weird out of the blue. We all sometimes feel like we're being watched. And so most of the time that doesn't trigger in us the assumption there's ghosts present. But for a certain subset of people, particularly ghost believers and people who are on ghost hunts, for example, there's a strong psychological aspect to it. We can touch on that later. But this is, the point here is that the ghosts emerge in the context of very specific expectations and psychological settings.
So
Expectations, but could I throw there's a nice technical term used in anthropology called the memorate. And that's when something unusual happens that people have a hard time explaining. It could be a weird noise in the middle of the night. It could be a bright light you suddenly see. It could be all sorts of things. And then so a memorate is like a personal experience that people have a hard time explaining. And what people often do then is they go to their peer group or whatever, and they say, look, this happened to me. What do you think it is? And then what happens is this memory usually gets explained within a traditional narrative framework. So somebody will say, oh, that was a ghost. Or somebody else will say, oh, that was an angel. Or somebody else will say, oh, that was aliens or fairies or what have you. So there's an interesting relationship between the personal experiences, the memorate, and the tradition that seeks to explain these experiences and gives shape to people's experiences.
Well, when you talk about explaining, certainly in the last 20 or so years, there's boatloads of cable TV shows have become sort of infamous for wanting to explain everything from pyramids being older than what is known to Bigfoot to lake monsters to all these kinds of things. But let me just throw out a few things that are associated with ghosts, and if you can tell me what a folkloric explanation might appeal like and a scientific one. The first one I want to talk about is you'd mentioned there are ghost cavalries. Wherever there's some tragedy, a kid is murdered in the basement, or it's an ancient Indian burial site where there was a massacre or something. From what I've read about it, people would say, well, the vibrations of pain and suffering were absorbed by the surrounding area. That's why we see the ghost soldiers keep marching, or the Indians keep doing their war dance, or the little girl keeps looking out the window where she was murdered, kind of thing. We can explain that, I think, folklorically, but anyone trying to investigate that in a scientific sense, I'm scared, my last breath, that gets absorbed by this room. What is the explanation that the attempt at trying to explain that in a scientific vein? Either one of you.
I'll jump at it. There's a couple contradictions in ghost beliefs. There are many contradictions in ghost beliefs like that. One of them is, as I mentioned before, sometimes ghosts are incorporeal. They can go right through walls. Other times they're said to throw objects and do things like that. And so there's lots of inherent contradictions. And when you pin ghost investigators down, you say, okay, well, what exactly do you mean? They sort of hem and haw, and they're like they sort of adapt the explanations as what they want. And this is one of the fundamental problems when you have ghost investigators or people that are trying to scientifically investigate ghosts, is that they're trying to apply a scientific framework, including, for example, control groups and double-blind studies, and there's all sorts of scientific research methodologies that can be, and I argue should be, applied to ghosts. I've written 2 books on that. The problem is that, in my experience, the ghost hunters aren't interested in that. They want the story. They want to freak out. They want to be, with their friends, running around, jumping at scary things in old buildings at night, and they don't want to do, and frankly often have no interest in in trying to bring some science to it. And I've written about this extensively in trying to encourage ghost hunters. Like, look, you believe that ghosts exist. I'm more of a skeptic, but if you're right, then do better research. Here's how you do this. You again, there are ways to investigate ghosts. And so just to bring back to your example, if you have a haunting that's supposed to occur on a regular basis. So, for example, on moonless nights or full moon nights, take your pick, or on certain anniversaries of famous battles or someone's death, what have you. If part of the story is that a ghost will appear and say something or do some action over else, if that's part of the lore, then you can predict this. You can be there on that time at the time and record whatever's going on. And in most cases they don't, or in some cases what the recording is so liminal, so mundane. So if you have ghost hunters and they go to an area and they spend 6-8 hours overnight recording things and audio and video stuff else, they'll comb through it, and eventually by random chance they'll come across some supposedly anomalous, oh, what's this weird sound? Well, it was 2:15. It was probably somebody farting in the next room. But in the context of ghosts, this is the sorts of things offered.
Toke?
Yeah, Benjamin, that was a great thing. And one, again, you focused on the stories and on the social aspect of it, which is the focus what we really find. So, it's really hard to study ghosts scientifically because they're really not a scientific subject. They've never shown up. They're hard to replicate. They don't. But what is objective, what is real, and what is very, very studyable is ghost stories. Right? Those are real, and so we can put together them. We can look at what stories people tell, and so that really tells you. If you look at different societies, different groups, the one question I like to ask is, what are people haunted by? In the United States, we have a lot of stories of, again, like you mentioned, Native American burial grounds. Well, guess what? America is built on Native American burial grounds, right? So this reflects our history, this reflects our tragic past, and this reflects ethical lapses in the past, what we are haunted by. People tend to be haunted by ethical lapses on a personal level, but also on a societal level. So, studying those stories and studying the stories for different groups can tell you a lot about, what people are haunted by and why. And then again, it's personal experience, but it's also very a social experience. And it's interesting in science of ghosts. And one question is why? Why worry about science of ghosts? Right? Why can't you just lead into a spiritual subject? But it has a very fascinating history. And this goes back to Martin Luther, frankly, and the Reformation. Because if you remember the Reformation, his big objection to the Catholic Church was the sale of indulgences. And also this idea that of ghosts. So the idea of sale of indulgences and ghosts were very related. Back in the Catholic Church during the late Middle Ages, people saw a ghost. You would go to your priest and you would say, "Look, I think I saw a ghost." And your priest would say, "Of course you did. That was one of your relatives. He's trapped in purgatory. You have to pay me money to pray for him." So this was the ghost stories and ghost belief was a major moneymaker for the Catholic Church in the late Middle Ages, in spite of the fact that when the Christian church started out, they didn't believe in ghosts at all. So that changed. And then that brought on the Reformation. And then Protestants were not supposed to believe in ghosts. That was supposed to be sort of, Catholic superstition. And so exorcism was left only in the Catholic Church. But the problem was in those areas that had turned Protestant, people kept seeing ghosts. People kept sharing ghost stories. So then the idea is you couldn't explain it via a spiritual or religious spectrum. And so then the thing is, well, maybe we can prove them scientifically, right? Maybe we can go out and document them. Ghost photography was really huge. Decided that maybe photography was picking up on things that the human eye wasn't. And so there are all sorts of these techniques that are still with us today. The ghost hunters of today owe a lot to these early debates that were going on in the Protestant Reformation about ghosts. And, maybe we shouldn't believe them at a spiritual level, but maybe we could believe them as a scientific sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that explanation. I mean that was perfect. And the only thing I'll add to it was that when you're looking at the evolution of ghosts, and specifically the evolution of the belief that ghosts are empirically provable, right? So for most of human history, people believed in ghosts, but it was considered a spiritual matter. It wasn't something that one would even think to test. It was sort of considered to be, well, how would you even test that? right? And
That's
then,
still true. That's still true in like Buddhism.
right? Yeah, exactly. Right, and then you know, in the middle late 1800s, you have the rise of spiritualism, right? So you have
Right.
the Fox sisters in Hyattsville, New York. You have this rise of this whole. I mean, it's now little known, but at the time it was a huge religion.
Huge.
Yeah, absolutely huge. And so you look, you know, 1870s, 1880s through the 1900s, you had huge numbers of people that were interested in ghosts, and at the same time, you had this rise of spirit mediums. Many of them were fraudulent and phony, parenthetically, who would pretend to communicate with ghosts, there was this whole racket, right? And it wasn't really until you got some of these organizations around the turn of the century who were claiming that they could actually manifest ghosts on demand, basically, during seances, for example. You'd have spirit mediums who would say, you know, come join the circle, give me some money, join the circle, and we'll see if we can make a spirit trumpet rise or whatever else. We'll see, talk to the dead. There was slate writing, all sorts of things like that. But these were some of the first times when it was popularly conceived that ghosts were something that were demonstrable. And then you fast forward to the TV shows that was mentioned a bit ago, right? You have the Ghost Adventures, the Ghost Hunter TV shows, and all of a sudden you have what I call the democratization of ghost hunting, right? You have everyday people who are seeing these TV shows saying, "Wow, these are two plumbers. If they can do it, I can do it." And that's that was the really populist message, right? Well, you don't need to be smart to look for ghosts. You don't need to use science. If you just use beepy gadgets and walk around, you can do that. And this held enormous appeal for many people. And this is one of the reasons why today we still see the huge number of interesting ghost hunting across the U.S. and around the world is due in part to exactly social media and this sort of democratization and people seeing this on TV and mistaking what they see on TV as some sort of actual investigation, which of course it isn't.
Well, the democratization too. It's also with the democratization of technology, where film became more on the individual level. Everybody could be a photographer. It didn't used to be the case. So
Exactly.
the technology became easier for the individual. But there was a big jump there because earlier on in spiritualism, and it was very mainstream, very bourgeois. You could order Ouija boards from Sears and Roebuck. President Lincoln held seances in the White House to help him with the Civil War. I mean, it seems like bizarre right now, but that's how sort of pervasive this idea of spiritualism was at the time. And so it also has a lot to do with the development of cinematography and the projection techniques, phantasmagoria shows, smoke and mirrors, where they would project these ghostly images onto smoke, literally smoke and mirrors, which is why, by the way, our ghosts are non-corporeal and wispy. Because people would go to the theater and they would see these wispy ghosts. Now, before that, ghosts were corporal in Western Europe. So the ghosts transformed through this spiritualism, the smoke and mirrors, the phantasmagoria shows. So that was going full force up to the late 1800s. And I think there were two main things that sort of interrupted the growth of spiritualism. And one was, one was the rise of psychology. Sigmund Freud and said, he's like, there's no spirit, you got a psyche, right? And so he tried to recast the study of the mind away from the idea of the soul and the spirit. And the other one was what's called the Third Great Awakening, which is the religious fundamentalist revival that was sweeping the United States, do a lot of changes in people's lifestyles, moving from agrarian things to industrial towns. And so this is when America became fundamentalist. This is when we have a lot of these newer American-only religions started to come up. The Pentecostalisms and the Southern Baptists and this sort of thing, that really recast these in terms of spiritual lives. So you have two forces going on that sort of dismembered spiritualism. One, a real regrowth of new Protestant religions that did believe in ghosts, that did believe in supernatural forces and walking the world. If not ghosts, at least demons or spirits. And the other one is this idea of the science of the mind rather than a sort of spiritual belief of the mind. Spiritualism is still around, but it's nowhere near as ubiquitous or as mainstream as it was.
I wanted to pick up on what I think it was Toke had said about photographs. I did a few months back a show on Bigfoot, and there's the famous Bigfoot from 1968, the Patterson Gimlin film. And for me, one of the things I find kind of funny when I see these things is the sort of Von Daniken-like people who believe will often say, well, don't you see that? This proves my point. No human being could walk like that man in the ape suit could if it was really a guy in an ape suit. And I remember when I was a teenager, walking one time on a snowy night, late snowy night, looking in the closed store windows and seeing my own gait was exactly like that fellow's gait. So you get this kind of believers who will posit anything. So going back to the earliest days of photography, to electric voice recording, supposedly, is there anything that we can trust now, especially now in days of Photoshop and all these other things? Is there any way that any electronic media could actually prove that a ghost exists, even if they did? You know,
I highly doubt they could, but I think one of the things to note is that for a lot of people, for a lot of people, seeing is believing, right? And so, and especially, early on. Now maybe we're a little bit more jaundiced now because we're used to photoshops and deep fakes and stuff. But again, when photography first came out, for many people that was proof. Photography was like science, and so we have all these great photos. You can check them out online, like ectoplasm and things. And right now they look like double exposures or bad production jobs. But at the time, they were considered terribly convincing.
well,
All the
like
way up to the fairies, the cotton link fairies,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, they were
yeah. So
obviously
people really
cutouts.
believe this. But
Full
even more
Conan
than that,
Doyle.
but even more than that, the phantasmagoria, the smoke and mirrors. This was the big theater experience of the day. People would go into the theater and they would see these Eastern mystics. There'd be smoke, there'd be mirrors, and they would see ghostly images on the smoke. So this was terribly convincing for people.
Yeah, well, I think the question gets back to the issue of again, it depends on how you define a ghost. I mean, if you believe that a ghost is a hallucination, then no, there's no way. If you think it's entirely psychological, then there's no way you're going to prove that. What happens is that, particularly with the ghost hunters, and including the TV ghost hunters we were talking about before, is that they have this sort of binary, in some ways contradictory belief system. On one hand, you often hear people, including ghost believers, saying, because I've had discussions with people and I've said, okay, look, you're a ghost hunter, you've been doing this for 10, 15 years, whatever it is. Why is it that we still don't have good evidence of ghosts? And they give me one of two answers. Either, well, we do have evidence and it's personal feelings and experiences, in which case I have to explain to them, again, having a background in psychology, that personal experience, it's memories, it's wonderful, it's compelling, it's not evidence, it's a story. And I love stories. I'm not being mean, but this is not good scientific evidence. Or on the other hand, they say, well, the problem is that our science hasn't evolved high enough. We haven't evolved good enough technology to detect ghosts. And I hear this all the time, and that's their explanation as well. There's things we don't understand. At one point, radio waves are invisible. We can't see those, but we know those exist. And the problem with this, and it's a very very simple answer, which is that there's a contradiction there, because keep in mind that ghosts are alleged to appear in photographs. Ghosts are alleged to be seen in the visible spectrum. Ghosts are alleged to be recorded on film and things like that. If that's true, then by definition, they can be captured and detected by current technology. You can't have it both ways. You can't on one hand say, well, current devices aren't good enough to detect these spirits, and at the same time show me a photograph of a ghost. Because a photograph of an alleged ghost it's a two-dimensional representation of what you're claiming cannot be detected. Well,
Benjamin, although I think that one of the problems though is assuming that ghosts, if they are real. I'm personally, I don't, as a folklorist, I don't even get involved in the topic if they're real or not. I'm like, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. What I know is that a lot of people believe it. A lot of people tell stories about it. And so, but I'll suspend disbelief. I mean, maybe they don't appear in the physical realm, but they appear directly to people's brains. Maybe they're out there, but they are not physically manifested. I've heard that explanation. And
but
I'm
if
like,
they're not
okay,
physically
maybe,
manifested, then
right? I mean, I don't.
But
again,
that's what I'm saying, though. Is that whatever explanation they come up with to explain away the fact there isn't better evidence is contradicted by the fact that there are photographs and videos allegedly of ghosts. So which is it?
You could have both. You could say that, oh, those guys are fake, but my experience is real, right? A lot of people would say
sure,
that.
Yeah.
Right. So, but these are, the most, so there's also a difference between sort of, the public ghosts, which were ghost hunters you tend to try to find, and the sort of the private ghosts. And the private ghosts are probably by far, I think, the dominant genre. I mean, the main ghost story in the United States, according to my research, is usually of a dead loved one, right? Somebody dies, and then the person, they come back, and they, after 2 weeks or something, they say something like, "Don't worry, I'm in a much better place," and they disappear. And that's probably the most sort of common ghost story, but it's not the one that would attract ghost hunters per se, right? Because they've already said their piece and they've left.
It's also not the sort of story that's going to attract Hollywood, right? And so it's interesting because you have these different incarnations of ghosts, right? You have the Hollywood version that we see in Poltergeist and Exorcist and Paranormal Activity, whatever else. These big, dramatic, sensational, blood coming from the walls and doing amazing, spectacular things, which bears no resemblance whatsoever to how ordinary, average people experience ghosts. And one of the things that's fascinating is that the ghost hunters are caught between these two worlds, right? Because on one hand, they're supposedly looking for something that might resemble some dramatic, sensational TV or horror film, but of course, that is rarely, if ever, reported in real life. Again, as I said, it's these sort of mundane things. And so on one hand, the ghost hunters are on the wrong trail there. The other thing I want to follow up on something Took mentioned before is the contradiction between how ghosts appear and what people would do with them. So by that I mean, as he just mentioned, for most of human history, many people believed in ghosts or spirits or ancestors. And to the extent that there was ghost hunting, or ghost investigations are trying to commune with the ghost, it was often a personal, private matter, sometimes maybe with a shaman or a priest or something else, but typically it was not something that wouldn't be on TV, right? It was very mundane. And so it occurs to me that there's this weird contradiction in that for most of human history, to the extent that people communed with ghosts, it was their relatives. It was their grandfather. It was somebody who died and they knew. This idea that you see on television of these big, bad, brave ghost hunters, dude, let's go find a ghost, man. Let's go to this haunted castle in Ireland and let's contact the ghost. What?
Why would the ghost contact you? Is what I would.
Right. Why would the ghost give a shit? I mean, there's no. I mean, it's so weird to the idea that. But
that's science, right? The idea is that science should be publicly available to everybody. So if you interpret ghosts through a scientific spectrum, you expect this to be publicly demonstrable, right? So that's the way of trying to bring in scientific inquiry. Yeah, I like to divide ghosts between wanted and unwanted. And most ghosts are wanted, right? Like, again, people who come back and say, I'm in a better place, or, Days of the Dead in Hispanic traditions where you invite the ghost back into your home. The Oban tradition in Japan, a lot of East Asian countries, very similar, where you invite the ghost back into your home. So these are wanted ghosts, and they tend to be family ghosts. And that works very, very different than the unwanted ghosts. There's some ghost traditions that kind of escape that, like in Ireland too, the idea of the fairy folk, which are often, they're not really ghosts, or if they are ghosts, they're sort of the aristocracy of the ghost. They host the dead. And so the banshee will wail when a person of your family is about to die. And so, you may not want to hear that, but it's not that they're necessarily trying to haunt you. They're actually trying to warn you. So there's some very complex ways that different societies have thought about relationships with the dead, but very few of them sort of fall into this publicly demonstrable scientific discourse.
Sure. So I wanted to ask.
I was just going to add. I love the framework of wanted versus unwanted, and I would just add that, of course, this can also apply to possession, right? And so the sort of possession that is often thought of, particularly in the Catholic traditions and Western traditions, is demonic possession, the exorcism, unwanted possession. At the same time, there's wanted possession, right? You look at candomblé, you look at voodoo, you look at, there's different traditions.
Well, in Christianity, the holy roll is being filled with the Holy Spirit, right?
Yeah, so handling snakes,
wanted spirit like possession.
So there's times in which you want to be possessed with a spirit, mediated by, of course, some priest or somebody who's in that role. And other times they're not. So again, you see the same interesting framework of wanted versus unwanted ghost spirits. Take your pick.
But I just one last thing. I will say that again, most people who believe in ghosts do not do so because of ghost hunters or public ghosts. Most people in my research who believe in ghosts do so because of private ghost stories. Again, mostly family ghost stories. People see it, they say things that nobody would have known otherwise. This is what makes most people that I know of who believe in ghosts believe in ghosts. You know,
I believe that's
very
accurate.
personal experiences.
So, does a belief in ghosts, either folklorically or scientifically, rule out a belief in reincarnation? Because they would seem to be mutually opposing. A ghost is something that's going to last, whoever knows how long. Where someone who believes in reincarnation, you're off. You know, you're paused and then come back.
Not necessarily. In fact, I think the same thing with the Christian tradition applies. So in Christian tradition or Abrahamic tradition, you know, your soul's supposed to go elsewhere. So very often the idea is that the process that should occur didn't occur. So that, you know, the person was not able to become reincarnated, that the person was not able to go to heaven, and that they're caught in some kind of limbo or something. So you see this very commonly, that the spirit should go on to the spirit land, but very often they don't. And another question is when? You know, if you do have a spirit or a soul within you and you do die, how long does it take for that soul to depart? Is there a time limit? A lot of traditions say, oh, the ghost may linger for a week, 40 days among some traditions. So they're you know, they don't necessarily go immediately onto reincarnation or immediately onto heaven. So there could be a little window of ghostly apparitions very often.
And I would just add to that that, you know, when you look at and you talk to ghost hunters, and I've been on dozens of ghost investigations with ghost hunters. Usually I'm sort of the token skeptic sitting back trying to bite my tongue and watch what everybody's doing. But oftentimes I've been in many cases where there will be a psychic medium or a spirit medium, and they will be communicating with the ghost, and they'll be part of the ghost hunting team. And of course, you know, I'm looking at this from a sort of scientific and folkloric perspective, but these are valued members of the team, and I've been there where they will say, you know, so, you know, there's a group of them, and it's usually a woman. There's often empathic and they're psychic mediums, and there's sort of a more feminine, nurturing role, and oftentimes they will talk about communicating with a spirit they assume is there. And it's interesting when you watch what they do, oftentimes they take great pride in their ability to help them cross over. So to them, a spirit is something that is in need of their help. It's something they can help with because of their psychic abilities or their knowledge or the occult knowledge of realms. And I've seen several of them just become that they've had this conversation with the ghost, sometimes in their minds, sometimes out loud, over the course of a few minutes, sometimes an hour or more, in which they'll have this conversation. Now, whether they're having the entire conversation in their head or there's actual spirit there is, of course, impossible to know. But
and also spirit possession too. They can become possessed by those spirits at times.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've seen that as well. But what's interesting to me is that they, again, it's a point of pride for them. It validates their psychic abilities, it validates their role, because they believe very sincerely, I believe, that they are helping this possibly fictional entity cross over, and so I've never really understood like how they believe they have the power to do something that a ghost itself couldn't do, but that's another facet to that.
I wanted to ask two things that are lesser spoken of in ghostly studies, but I've come across over the years. The first one, I don't know if either of you are familiar. There's a famous sci-fi book called by Fred Hoyle and a co-writer called The Black Cloud, when he spoke about life as we don't know it, that there would be this giant protein cloud out and out of space, and people could fly through it, and you wouldn't recognize life as it is. And one of the more interesting things in the last 20 years or so, I think, that I've read here and there, not too much, is that ghosts might be not the dead, but some other form of life that is trying to communicate with our form of life, and they can somehow sense or use our memories or whatever emotions to comfort us, to appear in a more, I guess, familiar form. I, is there any? Have you ever encountered people who believed in that? Or what is the status of that as a folkloric or a scientific idea?
Well, in many traditions around the world, again, there's some traditions that don't even believe in ghosts whatsoever, but they'll believe in other things. And so there's a very famous anthropology article. I think it's in most anthropology introductory tests called Shakespeare in the Bush. And it's this anthropologist who goes and tries to describe Hamlet, which of course relies on the idea of the ghost, to a society where ghosts don't exist. And they insist that no, that couldn't have been a ghost, but it could have been an omen sent by a witch. And similarly, Martin Luther said, ghosts aren't real, ghostly experiences are real, but that's actually the devil, trying to fool you into believing that it's a ghost. That's still a very, very popular view, by the way, among many, many Christians, is that, when people see ghosts, it's not really a ghost, it's actually some sort of demon or some sort of other supernatural creature trying to appear as a ghost. So sure, some sort of explanation like that is actually, traditionally found in a lot of societies.
Yeah, I mean, that gets to the point that I made before about how if you open the door, then, I mean, ghosts could be God playing with us, playing tricks on us. Ghosts could be extraterrestrials. Ghosts could be invisible dragons. Ghosts. I mean, if you can define a ghost variously as people do, then there's no criterion by which you can rule out, well, that's not a ghost. Well, you don't know it's not a ghost. All we can say from a scientific perspective is that it violates what we call Occam's razor. And Occam's razor is the general principle that, with all of the things being equal, that we should prefer the explanation that makes the fewest assumptions, right? So if we can explain something with 3 or 4 assumptions, or we can explain it with a different method, saying 6 or 7 things, the more likely one, it doesn't always hold true, but the more likely, the more plausible one is the one that demands the fewest assumptions. And I mean, could ghosts be extraterrestrials and other alien? Who, of course, ghosts can be whatever you want, but there's no reason to go outside the normal purview of normal beliefs and of the dead and things like that. So,
but it's interesting, right? When you
sure,
see these different aspects. Again, Martin Luther was like, people see ghosts, but they're not really ghosts. The devil is trying to trick them, and that reminds me a lot of your book, Dan. Right? That is some extraterrestrial intelligence appearing in the form of ghosts, or are they aliens? Alien is a huge belief in the United States. Most Americans believe in aliens, which is interesting. Aliens are right up there with ghosts in American belief, and so it's not unexpected that these beliefs should sort of cross over. On the other hand, you go to other societies like, say, Iceland. I have a folklore colleague there who did a survey. Icelanders believe in ghosts, maybe even more than Americans. On the other hand, they think that aliens is ridiculous. So they would never have that sort of explanation.
right.
So I wanted to ask too about there are people in societies and religions that believe in sort of a spiritual evolution, and I came across a few threads on different websites before while I was planning this show, and you often hear about my beloved cat, my beloved dog, my beloved parakeet, Fluffy, whatnot, comes back to give me comfort, but no one's ever seen the ghost of a Triceratops or a Brontosaurus, as far as I know.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Dan, because it's something I teach about a lot. Who can become a ghost?
What?
Right? Can only people be ghosts?
Yeah.
If you look at Native American traditions, as I do, I would say that animal ghosts, or non-human animal ghosts, I should say, since humans are animals, non-human animal ghosts probably outweigh the human ones.
Yeah.
In Western concepts, according to Abrahamic theology, only people have souls, and so in general, only people produce ghosts. If again, there's a tie-in. If animals don't have souls, then how could they produce a ghost? And so we don't tend to see animal ghosts. The only exceptions are beloved pets, really. But I mean, we never see you never hear about the ghost of all the cows slaughtered up along the I-5 or something. That doesn't really exist in our culture, but it does in other cultures.
And the other thing to keep in mind is that things that are associated with people also are seen as ghosts. So, I mean, you get into the finer details of, well, if ghosts are simply the spirits of the dead, then why are ghosts seen clothed, right? I mean, yeah. my clothing doesn't have a spirit, so it's things that are associated. And you see Civil War soldiers with arms that, with weapons and things like that. And by the same token, there's also, of course, ghost ships. There's the Flying Dutchman. There are reports of ghost carriages, and ghost sedans, even in some cases. So again, the connection between these ghost vessels is that they presumably are under the command or carrying ghosts. So it's not just sort of, there's not a ghost. I don't know any ghost stories of telephones or staplers or
Get me started. I could share some.
the telephone itself, or ghosts associated with the telephone.
Oh, well, I'm thinking more about there are some ghost telephones. I've had a haunted suitcase, but I was thinking about more of ghost of high technology. So
I agree with that.
I'm starting to see a lot of that hauntings on the internet.
My point is they're all objects that they're ghosts by virtue of being associated with ghosts.
But we have these traditional objects that we're associated with,
right?
But that's different in different cultures. Yeah.
Sure. Haven't there been supposed calls from the dead? I know there was a Twilight Zone original one with Rod Serling based upon just that premise from stories from the 30s or 40s. Haven't there been supposedly ghosts who have called people on the telephone? Hi, this is your Uncle Ben, and it sounds like them or whatnot, and no one could know that Uncle Ben, because no one in my new town knew of Uncle Ben, kind of thing, and you get.
Oh yeah. Sure. So one of the things I'm really fascinated with in my own research right now is online ghosts, cyborg ghosts. And so, most of my students are growing up now, they're digital natives. They've been on the broadband their whole lives. They spend a lot of their social life on broadband, on the internet. And so, when they die, that's where their ghosts show up. And there's a lot of the internet's a very haunted place now. Now, what's interesting is that you don't see the older ghosts showing up on the internet. Abraham Lincoln's ghost is still in the White House. He's not on the internet. The ghosts that are on the internet are mostly of those kids, younger people who invested their social lives on the internet. That's where the ghosts show up. So that's an interesting. I have all these wonderful collections of text messages from the beyond, haunted servers, all of this sort of thing.
Well, yeah. There's also I forget the name of the fellow, but back in the late 90s, I think in Scotland, there was supposedly a guy who was a time traveler who was sending messages about having written a book that would have been found 200 years from now or something, and people have said, well, the most obvious one that it was a fraud, that it was a time travel. But I've also read that some people, what you're saying, internet ghosts, that somehow spirits, I don't know, would project themselves or onto electronic devices to give information which was false or whatnot. But it seems to me that these are just similar iterations using ghosts as they could be. They could be wielded as aliens. They could be fairies. They could be deceivers, demons, or whatnot. And now they've made it to the internet age.
Internet's a very haunted place.
So I wanted to get back to one of the things I brought up originally. I had mentioned the idea of abortion and ensoulment and whatnot. So if we look at a more traditional, we just talked about the internet. If we look at a more traditional, the idea that I guess you would call it the purest part of the human, or the animating force. You might call it the homunculus that sits back in the brain, whatever that becomes the ghost, whatever animating force that is. What is the general belief? Is it a belief that spirit enters the body, and would it be half in a sperm, half in an ovum, and then is it two ghosts that unite into the individual that become one, and then at death it's in limbo until it's reincarnated, or it just wanders forever? What is the, I don't know even how to frame, what is, if you believe in the immaterial, the classic definition of a ghost, or a spirit, well, and is a spirit then, is a spirit before life and a ghost after life then,
Good question. But this is, again, this is very, it'll change depending on what religious traditions you're looking at. Because religious traditions very often set up ideas of the soul. I mean, ancient Egypt your soul had 5 parts in ancient Egypt, and only one of these could return as a sort of haunting, ghostly form. So a lot of it depends on what religious tradition we're looking at and ideas of the soul. But again, you're pointing out some really good questions. If it overlaps with the soul, again, when exactly does the soul leave your body? Exactly at the moment you die? Does it hang around for a while? Does it wait for the funeral? There's all sorts of different traditions. And then on the inverse, when does the soul come in the body? And I would suggest that this is the core of the abortion debate in the United States. For those people who believe that the fetus, that the soul comes into at conception, then this is a person. That little fetus is a person. For those who do not, then no, this two-celled organism is not a person. So that's why I don't think the abortion debate is ever going to be settled by science, because it relies a great deal on these sort of notions of souls and spirits and things.
But then wouldn't it be the person who's against abortion would then be arguing that, well, this particular soul, that square peg has to go in this round, or that square block has to go in this round hole, because it's destined to be in that person. Well, if you're the spirit and that fetus is aborted, well, why doesn't the soul just hop into the next fetus? The woman down the block.
Well, maybe is it murder, right? Again,
Yeah.
is terminating a two-celled organism murder? And for some people, it is, because they believe it's a person, because it has a soul at the moment of conception. But that is a particular religious framework. There's other religious frameworks, even in the past. In for example, in Catholicism, babies didn't have souls until they were baptized. And so, because of that, traditionally, you could not bury an unbaptized infant in a church graveyard.
I've forgotten
They'd
that.
have to have separate unbaptized kids' graveyards.
That's right.
This was lasting up into the 1960s, maybe in the 1970s in Ireland, I know. And so, again, the idea was that it was that magic of the baptism ritual that put the soul in. And that's a very different approach to, and again, the many societies that practice have allowed for infanticide. We're like, oh, how horrible, they're killing a person. But for most of these societies, no, this wasn't a person yet. It didn't have a soul yet.
So let me just wind up here. It's been a good discussion. I will link to both of your websites, benjaminradford.com and also to your USC page. So let me just wind up and ask you both two final points to head us out. And Benjamin, I guess you can go first. What do you think is the future of both ghost science and also ghost belief in terms of the popular culture, and any other closing remarks you have?
I think that the future of ghost hunting, I think it's kind of plateaued. I mean, it's not, there's always going to be the belief in ghosts. You're always going to have people who are interested in trying to learn more about them and think that they can offer information from other worlds as well. And in fact, just parenthetically, that's one of the arguments against ghosts being real, is if you can contact specific dead people who have knowledge of certain things, like where something is your paperwork is hidden, or contact Einstein's ghost, or you
contact Jimmy Hoffa. Where are you buried, Jimmy?
Yeah, contact Jimmy Hoffa, right? Contact Natalie Holloway, who's still missing 20 some years later, right? So if ghosts are real, and if you actually can communicate intelligibly and get valuable information from the other side, this could be incredibly important and useful. That hasn't happened, and I'll let you determine why you think that is. But I think that these things come in cycles, and so I think that the interest in ghost investigation per se, I think it's going to sort of peak and come back later on. It's always going to be with us. In terms of the science, one of my goals in my research, in my writing my books, is to try and bring science to ghost hunting. I don't make fun of ghost hunters because I am a ghost hunter. I don't think it's too silly because I love this stuff. We both love this. This is a fascinating, inherently fascinating topic that deserves attention, things like that. My point is not that ghosts should not be investigated. It's that if ghosts are real, the ghost hunters need to do a better job of it. So I'm not making fun of them. I'm saying do a better job, bring science to it. And if you can bring science to it, then if what you're claiming is real, actually is in fact real, then we can prove it. Until then, you're just spinning your wheels. So that's what I would say.
And Toke, the same to you, the science and the belief.
Sure.
I mean, if Julia Roberts came forward saying that she had some ghostly experience, would that kick off a new spiritualism wave?
Yeah, I mean, like Benjamin said, these things do change over time. They go in cycles, and one of the things we can really note, I think, just demographically, is that younger people, demographically speaking, their church membership has gone way down. So the one that's really coming up is this identifying as spiritual but not religious. This is just mushrooming. And so that it comes with implications. And so if you look at what do people mean when they spiritual but not religious, well, they still believe in spiritual aspects, the spirit. But they tend to take kind of a smorgasbord approach by looking at spiritual traditions from around the world, from Buddhism, from Hinduism, from different parts of the Abrahamic traditions. And so I think that globalization that's being brought on by the internet has a lot to do with it. And I think that will definitely continue to influence how people think about ghosts. But one other aspect I would like to look at too is that technology just keeps changing. The technology itself keeps changing. So one of the things I'm really interested in is, will androids have ghosts? Because they're being made to be like us, they're being made to be more of a part of our social world. This may seem a bit strange to Americans, but if you look at Japan, which is really in the lead of the android industry, and you've got androids that are, that are teaching kindergarten. You've got androids that are, the Aibo, right? This is the first sort of home android made in the shape of a little dog. This is quite a while ago, and the android, but they continue to learn, continue to be a part of the family. And so when the Aibos stopped being repaired, Sony stopped making the parts for them, and Aibos started dying. In Japan, these are given full Shinto funerals. In Japan, the idea is that souls are not restricted to humans, that material objects can have souls, and that therefore, yes, androids will be soulful beings, and you do have to pray for them in the afterlife. So you've even got android priests doing religious functions now in Japan. And as sort of AI, androids, and the whole cyborg experience becomes more and more a part of our lives, I think that's a very, very interesting trend to watch. And it brings with it a lot of ethical questions. Here's the big one. Do we have to treat androids in an ethical manner or not? Right? Can you beat your android to death if it's just a machine, like, smashing your car? Or is there a problem? Because, perceptually, it's going to be perceived differently. If someone's smashing their car, you might be like, well, it's just your car, dude. But if they're smashing their android and the android's like, Bob, please stop, help me, somebody, that's gonna bring on a different emotional experience. And so we're going to have to start, I think, dealing with these expansions of our social realm as these expansions are being rolled off the assembly line.
Well, it brings up the subject of personhood too. Do whales, for example, the toothed whales, the dolphins, orcas, they in many ways are as intelligent as primates, are chimpanzees, are gorillas. And if we do find some kind of sentient life out there, life as we know it or don't know it, would they have souls? Is souldom or ghostdom endemic to living? Might we be the only living creatures in the cosmos that have ghosts? Do other aliens have some other kind of exotic thing?
Right. If you look at, again, what a society is haunted by, and you look at it in the past, right? So in America, we're haunted by our treatment of Native Americans, the idea of building on a sacred Native American burial ground. So what I like to wonder is, what are we going to be haunted by in the future? And that means, what are our ethical lapses of today that we're not keeping track of? We didn't keep track of our ethical lapses against Native Americans in the past, and that's why we're haunted by them. So what are we going to be haunted by in the future? And I would look at things like, AI and androids, and also, as you point out, non-human animals. We are currently going through the Earth's 6th great extinction. In my lifetime alone, most species in the world have gone extinct, and that transition is not slowing down. So we are responsible for the 6th great extinction of life on Earth. I would suggest that we may well be haunted by that. I mean, what is it to kill a 65 million year old organism, which we have done in my lifetime? I would suggest that may well haunt us.
Well, again, a great conversation, and I want to thank both of you for it. And so thank you again.
Thanks for having us on.